Okay, now let's look at topic 1.3. This one in period one is the developments in South and Southeast Asia from 1200 to 1450. High frequency topics for just like what we did with 1.2 for core religious and cultural ideas include Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, and the caste system. For Hinduism, just like Islam was to Darul Islam, for this region, it was the foundation of social structure in India. It does include Dharma, which is the duty or moral role in society based off of your caste, karma, and Samsara, which is the belief in reincarnation. Buddhism is Buddhism did emerge. It had already emerged in East Asia or in South Asia, and from there it had spread out. It does begin to decline in India, but will continue its spread across Southeast Asia. Islam also was introduced to this region. This Islam itself, even though Hinduism and Buddhism are more associated with this region, Islam is one of those topics that has a pretty high frequency of appearing on the exam. Most often, it's a continuity and change over time, or some type of impact question. What impact did the spread of Islam have in this part of the world, in South and Southeast Asia? So just keep that in mind. So for Islam, it does expand into India and Southeast Asia via trade networks and conquest. This is different than what we saw with Darul Islam. So there is some conquest involved here. The caste system, another high frequency topic, typically again for CCOT. It was this rigid social structure in India that was determined based off of occupation and social status. The Varna, so these are two terms that come up quite a bit. So Varna is the hierarchy. These are those four major social classes within the caste system. And then the Jati are the smaller regional caste groups based off of specific jobs and occupations within the Varna. So make sure you're familiar with those two terms. Politically, for the governance theme, the Delhi Sultanate is the most frequently tested subject or state, I guess, for this region of the world. The Delhi Sultanate, you need to remember that it was a series of different Islamic Turkic dynasties that did rule over predominantly northern India. This was a Muslim type rule. They did rule over a predominantly Hindu population. We had Delhi-based sultans that were in charge in different locations. So just like what we see with the Abbasid dynasty, there was really no one unifying person. It was just a series of different Turkic dynasties and Delhi-based sultanates. This obviously, because of this fragmentation, this does show a religious diversity and cultural blending because of the different locations and how different themes are going to be practiced based off of the blending of the religion and the cultures. They relied heavily on military elites and cavalry within the Delhi Sultanate. Religiously, we see tolerance and conflict. This is a major AP Gov theme for this time period. Some rulers were tolerant, but others were not. And so this is key for continuity and change questions. So the tolerance level of certain rulers within the Delhi Sultanate. Feudal and regional rule, we see a lot less centralized than China. There was not, whereas China will have during certain periods a centralized bureaucracy, we do not see that in South Asia at all. Instead, we see basically just a blend of different competing states. Culturally and religiously, again, so here's that Bhakti movement that you can draw a lot of similarities to with Sufism. So Bhakti was very, very similar. So it's kind of this, you see that word again, that mystic association. Just like Sufism, the Bhakti movement really focused on devotion to this personal connection that could lead to a direct connection with a god or deity. In addition, The members of the Bhakti movement, the leaders of it, they very much were they challenged caste restrictions. They did not like this social hierarchy that put some people very, very low socially. So this was a major issue that we saw with the Bhakti movement as well, was them not just trying to spread Hinduism, but the fact that while spreading it, they also denounced caste restrictions. Sufism, again, we see this overlap with 1.2. It was also kind of this mystic Islamic. It helped to spread Islam peacefully. Same thing kind of happened with Hinduism and the Bhakti movement. Something that is important with the belief systems here, we see syncretism, which was important, the blending of Hindu, Buddhist, and Islamic traditions, whereas the Bhakti movement is going to try and spread Hinduism in South Asia. The Sufis will be instrumental in trying to spread Islam in other locations, and we see that in Southeast Asia, not South Asia. So for this one, remember 1.3 is South and Southeast Asia. Economically, the major drive here was going to be the Indian Ocean Trade Network. This is a very critical high test frequency concept for 1.3 South and Southeast Asia. The Indian Ocean is what connected East Africa, the Middle East, South Asia, Southeast Asia, all of it together, and merchant transference of different types of belief systems and just everything that we see. But again, we're going to talk more about that when we get to Unit 2. Monsoon winds were instrumental in making sure that the Indian Ocean trade progressed the way that it did. The understanding of navigators of the monsoon, like for the monsoon winds, knowing that they were cyclical and being able to predict the patterns, it directly affected trade patterns as well. Because of that, and this is a topic that a lot of kids tend to latch on, are the diasporic communities that will develop. And one of the best examples that we see here are the Swahili city-states. I'm going to add that real quick. So as you know, we discussed in class earlier on at the beginning of the year that merchants from South Asia would frequently travel to the east coast of Africa. And this was done, of course, when the winds were blowing north to south. So we saw this was the dry season, or the winter monsoons, that would blow in a certain direction that would help the sailors to travel in the direction that they went. While they were there, they did not try to make this return trip until the wet season emerged, or the summer monsoons emerged, and then they would make that return trip with goods from the coast of Africa. So it was this back and forth. What's interesting, though, and this is the part that students tend to latch on a lot for, are the development of these diasporic communities, particularly, again, with the Swahili city-states on the east coast of Africa. A lot of merchants would settle in these port cities. While they were there, they would spread religion, they would spread culture, and sometimes they would end up with another wife and another family that the other family back home never even knew about. So we do see this kind of blending of culture. You could have someone who was Hindu from South Asia making their way down to the Swahili city-states, being exposed to Islam, and because of that, or some kind of animism or folk religion or something else, just some type of belief system. And we see kind of this blending within this family or this relationship, if there was something like that going on. So pretty interesting development that we see. They're very, very unique type of system or situation that we have there. Significant people to know for South and Southeast Asia: Siddhartha Gautama. He is contextual but foundational, just like Muhammad. Kabir was a mystic poet. He is a very testable, high-frequency topic. He was a 15th century poet and religious teacher who became one of the most important figures associated with the Bhakti movement. He promoted religious tolerance and unity while criticizing both Hindu priests and Muslim clerics. Guru Nanak, he is the one that we actually discussed in class. He is a high frequency tested individual. He was the one that we discussed as being the founder of Sikhism, which emerged in northern India during the Bhakti era. So here's what's interesting about Sikhism. So during the Bhakti era or the Bhakti movement, obviously we know there's going to be a lot of syncretism that is at play here, but where Sikhism is different. Um, Sikhism was not a reform movement like Sufism or the Bhakti movement. It was the development of an entirely new religion. The core beliefs, of course, was the belief in one God, that God was beyond religious labels, and that people should focus on devotion, equality, and living an honest life. In addition, Guru Nanak, he vehemently rejected the caste system. So this was something that he had in common, could be influenced because of the Bhakti era. How you could see a question about him. So if you see a question about Guru Nanak and Sikhism, you could definitely discuss the fact that this would be like an example of a historical situation. If you got some kind of maybe a document from him for a DBQ, the bigger picture for earning that sourcing point for a historical situation could be your discussion of the Bhakti era and the fact that the environment in which he existed at that time was already starting to see this transformation, and that could have been something that influenced him. So those are the kinds of things that would count for uh, either evidence beyond or historical situation. Again, this topic is really very important for religious syncretism, and overall, it did blend different characteristics of both Hinduism and Islam. Major states and empires for South and Southeast Asia at the time. For South Asia alone, Delhi Sultanate. This is the most important tested topic. If you're going to see a question about some type of state or governance for South Asia in period one, you need to make sure that you mention Delhi Sultanate. For Southeast Asia, you do need to know that these two were key examples of maritime trade-based states in Southeast Asia because they flourished due to Indian Ocean commerce. And so those two states were the Srivijaya and the Majapahit. And so let's look at both of those right now. So the Srivijaya Empire is present-day Sumatra, Indonesia. It was initially a Buddhist trading empire. They controlled the Straits of Malacca, which allowed them to gain a lot of currency through taxation by making the different straits in this area checkpoints where they could essentially collect a toll. And that was one of the major things that they used for their economy. This is interesting and different compared to all of the other empires and states and dynasties that we have at this time. So this made them very, very unique, which you always hear me talk about these outliers. This is a different case scenario. So for these two, they made their money in a completely different way compared to, say, an agrarian society or through merchants trading or having some kind of silver tax, like what we're going to see happen later on with China. So this was a very, very unique type of way in which these civilizations earned their money. Following that was the Majapahit. This is present-day Java in Indonesia. This was also a powerful regional trading state. They controlled trade in the Indonesian archipelago. We do see monuments that begin with Hindu deities, but then we slowly see in some of these pieces of art in architecture a transition into Buddhist iconography. So this you can use the Majapahit Empire as a really good example for demonstrating continuity in Indian culture, but also this blending of culture between Hinduism and Buddhism, and eventually, of course, Islam as well. If you are limited on time and you need to study any one thing, these are the main topics that we see tested most frequently. So caste system, Delhi Sultanate, Bhakti movement, Indian Ocean trade, Islam, and the fact that it spread via trade and conquest, and then, of course, syncretism. Typically, you could see these types of questions that are this kind of formatted situation. So for multiple choice, you could see something like which factor contributed most to the spread of Islam in Southeast Asia. Anything involving Indian Ocean trade is going to be your key answer there. For an SAQ, explain one way religion changed in South Asia. You could talk about the Bhakti movement and how they attempted to make it seem more personalized, which appealed to a large portion of people. The development of Sikhism, of course, and then finally the spread of Islam. So any of these three would be excellent ways that you could talk about continuity and change in South Asia, South Asian belief systems and or religions. For LEQ and DBQ topics, same thing. So religious diversity and interaction, the spread of Islam through trade, social systems, in particular with this one, the caste system, versus new religious ideology. Big takeaway for students for 1.3, know that religion was defined by religious diversity and interaction. It spread through trade, conquest, and Sufism, and that there was a strong continuity of the caste system despite influences and rejection by some. And finally, Southeast Asia was deeply shaped by trade networks. And the best examples, again, that you have there for that are going to be these two empires right here. Okay, so that is a review. Top things you need to know for 1.3, developments in South and Southeast Asia. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at topic 1.4, developments in the Americas. So I will be posting a separate video on that a little bit later.